If you want something to change in college athletics, just wake up the next day. And today, Florida State Board of Trustees meeting tomorrow. And I thought the best written column of anybody that I read was Dan Wetzel, Yahoo Sports. I'm not saying that because he's joining us. He's joining us because that's exactly the way I felt, that he's been with us before on 365 Sports. Dan, thank you very much. I love so what if the proverbial dog that catches the car, now what? Or they're not interested in a team until that team becomes available. Is today's news surprising at all to you, or is this something that was just a matter of time?
I mean, Florida State's been saying for a while, quietly and certainly publicly, for over a year, that they wanted out. They were going to find a way out. They're at the ACC. The grant of rights in the ACC extends through the 2036 season. So 2037 is the first time you could get out if it just plays all its way out, which is obviously a long way off. The money in the ACC is, low 30 millions. The SEC and the Big Ten could get double that. And for Florida State, which certainly sees itself as an equal to those programs and is surrounded geographically by Florida, Georgia, Auburn, Alabama, LSU, all of that, the idea of being 30 million down a year, at least, is just untenable for them, certainly unappealing. So they've been saying we're going to find a way. They get snubbed on the playoff committee, getting the playoff at 13-0. That just rallied anger and disappointment there. The Baylor fans know about that kind of stuff. And so they're doing something about it. They're gonna sue and try to get out of the ACC grant of rights. Now, whether they can or not, I don't know. No one really knows exactly what that grant of rights says. But they haven't been able to get out. Grant of rights are hard to get out of. We will see. But if they can, that's probably the end of the ACC as we know it, because they're not the only ones that would like to try to get a better situation. So it is a seismic move. I know it doesn't seem that exciting, a board of trustee meeting in Tallahassee to say we're going to file a lawsuit, or the actual filing lawsuit. But as everybody knows, it's crazy in college sports and what can spark, the demise of the Pac-12 after 108 years. What can make Arizona a Big 12 team, Arizona Central Florida games, or whatever we got, here it is.
Dan, when it comes to the ACC part of it, you kind of mentioned that just sort of grouped all the anger back together as the season was sort of winding down. It seems like there's a lot of well, if we were somewhere else, what could the ACC in theory have done any differently? And, they couldn't have done anything about the playoff snub either, but it did feel like that was just a convenient final straw to use as, all right, now we're going at it after a lot of barking.
Yeah, I agree with you. First off, there's nothing they could do. The ACC and Florida State's a prominent member of the ACC, and they helped create a 4-team playoff when there were 5 power conferences. And when they did it, I think all of us sat around and did the math and said, well, wait, what happens if and they go, oh, don't worry about it. Well, here we are. It didn't make any sense. It's 5 leagues, 4 spots. Didn't have to be a mathematician to see the problems there. They are so. Some of this is brought on themselves. They were part of the ACC that agreed to a 20-year contract with ESPN because they wanted stability. Well, stability means not enough money. So there's a lot of things in terms of this playoff stuff. Yeah, there's nothing you can do, and that problem is solved. That's my thing about it is it stunk, but we have a solution. It's called the 12-team playoff. It's coming next year. The ACC will get an automatic bid, almost assuredly, every year. So whatever. I don't see this as that. That's the reason. But in Tallahassee, the belief is the committee said we're not leaving the SEC champion out, and because of that, we're leaving Florida State out. And if Georgia had defeated Alabama and been the number 1 seed, it would have been Georgia 1, Michigan 2, Texas 3, and Florida State 4. But because Alabama had to get in there as the SEC champ, Florida State got bounced. So I think that created a little more resentment and more spark.
You could always feel pretty good about yourself, and Florida State has a great history. There's no question about college football, the lineage from the Bobby Bowden years to who they are even now. But if, in fact, and I know you have great sources in the SEC and the Big Ten, if they were to tell you, here are the two teams we would want if the ACC ever became available, or we wanted to go and get somebody from the ACC, would Florida State be one of those two?
The number one choice for both leagues, if you talk to people in both leagues, is North Carolina, University of North Carolina. It's obviously not as successful in football by any means, but it's got the basketball, but it's the state school, big state, very, very popular in its state. Florida State is one school in the state of Florida. There's also pro teams in Florida. A lot of people who live in Florida didn't actually grow up in Florida. It's not quite the same. So as much as it'll bring some TV numbers, sure, everyone knows Florida State. It's not like North Carolina. North Carolina is the one they want. And the other one you hear they all talk about is Virginia for the academics, and the same thing, the state of Virginia, and get into that population and all of those things. Those are actually more appealing in theory to the SEC and certainly the Big Ten than Florida State and Clemson, which I think every college football fan would just say, well, just grab Clemson and Florida State. That'll help your league. Like those are great football programs. Miami's now they're recruiting again. They could certainly be a great football program. That's an exciting team. Now all of that gets said in theory, but I had a Big Ten trustee today say, look, once they're available, all things can change. And all of a sudden the TV network says, hey, look, we'll give you this much more money, or this will be this much more appealing if you add Florida State and Clemson or Florida State and North Carolina, then anything can happen. So a little bit of it is like, in theory, you say, I'm not interested in that person. They're in a relationship, and all of a sudden the relationship ends and you go, yeah, now I'm interested. So we'll see what plays out. But Florida State is not, when you talk to people right now, the number one choice out of that league.
The Big Ten didn't really want Oregon and Washington, right, until the Big 12 helped make that a lot easier for them. Kind of what you're saying there.
Yeah, the Big 12, all of a sudden they were available. I mean, they could have grabbed them. If you think of the Big 10 expansion, they go get USC and UCLA, and they say, okay, that's it. That's all we want out west. Then all of a sudden the Pac-12 is falling apart, and NBC, CBS, and Fox are saying, hey, take these guys. They'll help in television. They'll help with television ratings, and they get them to take a half share of revenue. Like Washington and Oregon are splitting a share of the revenue in the Big Ten. You make a deal, boom, now you got them. If you talked in theory, even last summer we were writing those stories, you talk to people in the Big Ten, they go, boy, our presidents would really love to add Cal and Stanford, the academics, the entree to San Francisco, the Silicon Valley, all the wealthy alums out there, all the smart students that would maybe go to Big Ten schools. And, in the end of the day, they didn't want them because their football teams aren't good. So there's a lot of grandstanding about what's important. At the end of the day, it's generally who's the most exciting football program is. So, we will see. But it could get really messy over the next 2 years. This is the next front of conference realignment that I know everyone's sick of.
Dan, is there any chance at all, and I know, again, I mentioned about their history, but is there any chance at all they could win this and then not have a place to go? And would that then shift from the SEC or the Big Ten? And could we see shrapnel occur that is a part of the Big 12?
Well, you could certainly go to the Big 12. They're not going to, let's not get ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They'll take them in a second,
Yep.
As they should. So the Big 12 is there. They also could just reorganize the ACC. One of the problems with leagues that get too big, and the ACC was kind of your first super conference in a lot of ways. They merged the old ACC with some of the pieces of the Big East that they wanted. They tried to create this East Coast situation. Well, they may sit there and say, hey, look, we're better off as a small conference. Clemson, Florida State, Miami, North Carolina State, Virginia Tech, something like that, Virginia. And we don't need Boston College, and we don't need Wake Forest, and we don't need Syracuse, or whatever it goes. They may cut some of those people out. I think that's playing C or D, but you could certainly have that. You could also have the Big 12 be able to come in and say, all right, maybe we don't get Florida State and Clemson, but could we get some of these other schools that are pretty appealing? Could we get more on basketball? I know the Big 12 cares about basketball, which other conferences don't. We're talking Louisville, talking Duke, talking, Syracuse. You got some serious basketball programs and some decent other deals. So, look, these things are so crazy. You go, that doesn't make any sense. But, did any of this ever make any sense 5 years ago?
Dan, I have, and again, there was a time when Louisville, at least when the Big 12 was looking at possibly expanding, they went through that, 5 or 6 years ago, and I think they were just basically doing it to make it look like they cared. But I've been told by administrators in the Big 12 that Louisville has always still, not that they're unhappy in the ACC, but they've always kind of had interest in the Big 12. Have you heard, and I'm not saying they would leave the ACC if it was healthy and everything was fine, have you heard anything about ESPN in this 2036 grant of rights timeline, that ESPN actually, they have an opt-out and not the ACC if they wanted to use it? Why they would use it, I don't know, but they might have that coming around the corner?
I don't know if that they do or don't. I have heard that they might, but this is a good deal for the ESPN right now, and so they're getting they're getting the games they want, and they're getting a lot of really good basketball, which fills a lot of hours in the winter. It's not as profitable, but they got to put something on. But they get some good football. They're basically all SEC now, and this is a good deal for them. And the television rights markets are softening. All media is struggling in different ways. There's not this, so much of the money is going to the NFL. What can the NBA get? You're seeing the regional sports networks falling apart, all sorts of different stuff. So it's not like there's just this bottomless pool of ESPN money that they're just sitting there. They're not in 110 million homes anymore. They're trying to make ends meet. So, what they end up choosing to do would be, I would think they want to keep the ACC together as is, because they're willing to pay that $30 million.
Dan, you've heard the phrase "power two" that started to be used by media even more and more. I've noticed that, and shoot, there's a league that's leaving after it's going to be no more. There's going to be 4 at best. But you mentioned it at the top of just sick of realignment. Realignment's crazy and all of that. Are you still surprised? Even though you never say never in college sports, are you still just surprised when you sit back and look at the subject matter here of Cal and Stanford joining the ACC and these guys going over here and 18 teams in the Big Ten? Is this even above even the creative college football imagination and realism in your mind? It just feels crazy, the place we're in right now with college athletics and all this potential movement.
Yeah, look, we know, we know that, guess what? There's going to be 50 programs that are in on the money. They'll play football all over because there's too many good players and they need to play each other and stuff like that. But we know we're heading to two 2016 leagues or something, or 3 or something like that. But every time it whittles down, you just sit there and go, this is crazy. Wait, Stanford and Cal have no value. I don't know. You just sit there and go, can't you figure out a better way? Just the other day, Chip Kelly, the UCLA coach and the Oregon coach back in the day, I don't know if you guys saw the thing.
Yep.
He said, let's just have everybody's an independent. Let's just get 60, 65, whatever the number is of power, 4 or 5, whatever, and just share all the revenue, and then have some kind of scheduling situation where you play each other throughout the years and you protect some rivalries, and just do that. And then the group of 5 could have their group of, their pool of money. And why can't we just do that and preserve it? And you go, yeah, that makes total sense, except someone's got to give something up, or there's got to be trust and cooperation and teamwork and leadership. And there's just none of that in college sports and long-term thinking. And so that's the disappointing part, is you sit there and go, well, I don't know. They're running it like a business, but it's not just a business. It's there's an ethos to college sports that all of these teams somehow kind of matter, even if you're not a fan of them. I look at a Washington State and Oregon. I like that, knowing they're there. It's not that they're ever going to win the national title or they're, my favorite team, but we all sat there and watched, Washington State games late at night because they're fun. And it's snowing up there and they're throwing the ball 50 times. And that's just part of the fabric of the sport. And as you whittle this down, it gets away from some of that. So you just go, gosh, we might not have Duke and Carolina in the same league. Like, why would we ever do that? Like, why? There's just so many different things. You go, gosh, this doesn't make any sense. Can't somebody stop this train? It's just not going to stop. And so it's every man for himself. It's find whatever the highest peak you can and hope you survive as long as you possibly can.
I got to tell you that the line in your story today, and I've mentioned this, what if they are the proverbial dog that catches the car? Now what? Like, I tell you, it's fantastic. Have you ever written a column where you've actually just walked away from it and went, damn, that was pretty good?
That's my dad's old line. He used to always say, you're going to be the dog that caught the car. What are you going to do then? And then I'd be like, oh, that's a good point. He used to say that to us all the time. So there you go. I gave you a new line.
Yep.
Line.
I love it. Dan, thanks for your time, man. I know you're busy. We appreciate it. As I said,
Always
just
fun,
wake up the next day. Something is new in college athletics. We appreciate Dan Wetzel, Yahoo Sports, for his time today with us on 365 Sports.